Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you back for session 4 of our webinar series on the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. My name is Matthew McGuire, and on behalf of the Ohio LTAP Center, we are glad to continue this transition to the 11th edition of the MUTCD and the new Ohio Supplement with you. Today's session focuses on Part 6, covering temporary traffic control. To lead today's discussion, I am joined once again by Kevin Fiant from ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering. Before I turn the floor over to Kevin, I have just a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth session. We will be monitoring your questions throughout the entire presentation. Please submit them through the questions panel as they come to mind. Our team will be responding to you directly in that same panel. While we won't have a dedicated Q&A block at the end, if a particularly relevant question is raised, we may pause to address it with the entire audience. Should you experience any issues with your audio or video, we recommend closing the webinar and rejoining using your original link. If the problem persists after rejoining, please message us via the chat panel. Our team will be happy to assist you. I highly recommend downloading the PDF of today's slides. Not only is it great for taking notes, but it also gives you immediate access to any clickable hyperlinks to manuals and resources that are mentioned today. To view the file, simply select the Handouts pane and click on the desired document. The file will automatically download to your default web browser. You can then select the file at the bottom of your browser window to open or save it. Today's session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants once it is processed. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Kevin. Kevin, the virtual floor is yours.
All right, well, thanks. I appreciate it, and we will get going here. Again, want to just again introduce myself. I'm Kevin Fiant with Office of Roadway Engineering. Been with ODOT for 25 years, 25 plus now, and worn a variety of hats over that time. So worked for quite some time at District 6. Up in Delaware, and worked on a variety of projects, including several, MOT tasks. So this, hopefully we'll be able to bring some good information to you today. Also with us here is Jonathan Young. He is the traffic control section head, and then we also have Emily Willis, who is one of our means of traffic engineers as well. They'll be monitoring questions and like Mark was saying, responding to those as we can through the chat box. So we will go ahead and get going here. And first off, just wanted to go through a few housekeeping things. We already talked about it a little bit, but as far as questions, just make sure that you can throw those questions in the chat box or question box on the GoToWebinar in the GoToWebinar window. So get those questions in there. If you can, it would really help us out if you can reference a slide number, or if it's about a particular section of the MUTCD, put that in the question. That'll just help us to get to that information a little quicker and be able to respond a little bit more efficiently. And then, if there is any questions that come up through the session that we're not able to get a response to during the session, we will work on getting stuff out to those folks afterwards. Also, just want to let everybody know that we are going to be having 2 breaks today. So this is pretty long session. We've got a lot of things to get through today, but we will be breaking it up into 3 segments. So there'll be 2 breaks in between those 3 segments. So just want to let everybody know about that as well. Talking about agenda for today. So for those of you that have set in on any of the previous MUTCD sessions, agendas kind of set up very similar to the previous sessions. So first off, it's going to be a little bit of a overview review of how to use the Ohio Supplement and the MUTCD together. If you need some additional information on that area, I definitely encourage you to check out session 1. That takes a much deeper dive into just all the details of using the supplement and kind of the background, as well as all the background information in part 1. But as for today, the primary focus is going to be looking at part 6, which is the temporary traffic control. We also are going to have a few examples, just some photographs of some different setups, and talk about a few things with some of those setups. So hopefully you all will get some information about the changes with the MUTCD, and also get you thinking about some examples and maybe how you can use some of this information in your day-to-day activities. As far as goals for today, what we're looking to do is, again, show folks how to use our Ohio Supplement and MUTCD together to make up our new OMUTCD. We also want to make sure we're highlighting some of the different changes from the previous manual. And then also we're going to take a little deeper look at part 6. We're not going to be able to cover everything because it's a very it's a large section of the manual, but want to hit on the main topics and at least kind of give everyone an idea of where they can go to look for stuff in the future if they have a question on a particular topic related to part 6. And then, like I talked about before, we're also going to be looking at a few examples as well. That'll be kind of towards the end of today's session. So what we won't be able to do with this session, we're not going to be able to cover every last change in the manual. There was a lot of changes from the 2009 version to the current version. What I will do, this slide shows that there's some reference information out there with the release of the new national manual. There was a red line version that marks up the previous edition, and then there was also a summary of disposition to the comments received throughout. So between those two things, you can take a much deeper dive into the changes associated. Now I want to kind of transition a little bit and talk, again, this is kind of a little bit of a review for folks that have been in previous sessions, but I want to talk briefly about just how to use the new manual, the new Ohio Supplement, in conjunction with the national manual. And, first off, just this slide's just talking about how we have transitioned from a standalone document over to 2 documents, which now is the National MUTCD and Ohio Supplement. So, and there's links provided to both of those here in the slide, and actually here in the few slides coming up, there also will be a QR code you can scan with your phone or whatnot while we're going through this as well. This slide just wanted to show, the covers of the old version, which for us was the 2012 version of the OMUTCD. And then what we've transitioned to is on the right-hand side of the screen here, the national manual, as well as our Ohio Supplement. So, now we're using two documents together. Also want to point out that the national manual here recently, about a little over a month ago, they released their first revision to the national manual. I just want to make sure that our users are aware of the revisions to the national manual. We want to make sure that you're using the most current national manual as well as the most current Ohio Supplement. We are planning some updates to the Ohio Supplement. Those will be released in July of this year. Next, want to talk about just the breakdown of the MUTCD. And so this slide's showing parts 1 through 5, and it breaks out, when those different parts were covered in these various LTAP sessions. So parts 1 through 5, we've already been through either in session 1, 2, or 3. The other thing just to hit on again, part 5 of the new manual is a completely different topic from what it previously was. The previous manual had a section devoted for low volume roads that has went away now. What was done with the manual is that the low volume road information has now been kind of placed in all of the different pertinent sections. So if it has to do with temporary traffic control devices, let's say, you're going to find relevant information related to low volume roads over in part 6. Moving on here, so this is the remainder of the manual and kind of the main parts of the manual. Today's topic is part 6. We're going to be talking about temporary traffic controls, and then coming up here in a couple weeks, session 5, we're going to hit on part 7, which is our school area traffic controls, and then part 9, which is our traffic controls for bike and pedestrian facilities. We already have hit on part 8. It was included with a couple other parts in session 3. Moving on, want to just again talk briefly about how to go about using these two combined documents, and try to break it down in just to a couple simple processes. So, first off, you want to take a look at which part and section of the MUTCD that you're interested in. And by that, I mean the national MUTCD. So take a look at that, figure out what section is of interest to you. And then once you have determined that, take a look at our Ohio Supplement table of contents. In that table of contents, we list out all of the sections that have been carried over to the Ohio Supplement that have any Ohio specific content. So if the area of interest shows up in our table of contents in the Ohio Supplement, then you just use that content in the Ohio Supplement. If it does not show up there, then you just would be using the federal or national MUTCD. And again, I just want to stress that if there was any specific Ohio content in any part of a section, we made the call based to pull that whole entire section over into the Ohio Supplement. We just didn't want users to have to be constantly leafing back and forth between the two documents. So that was kind of a purposeful decision there. So next we're going to take a quick look at the actual Ohio Supplement webpage. But before we get there, just want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, the Ohio Supplement document's a PDF document. It has all of the sections that are part of it are all bookmarked. So whatever you are using to access that document, make sure that you're aware that, if it's Acrobat or some other PDF software, open up the bookmarks, because that will help you kind of bounce around to the different sections of interest. The other thing, just to make everybody aware, is that the Ohio Supplement document is searchable, and we even went through and did some OCR on the different figures and tables that are part of the Ohio Supplement to pull in that content, so that if you're searching for something, whether it's just in the regular text or it's in a figure or table, you should get hits on keywords in both of those areas. On the national manual, some of the figures and tables are not, unfortunately, not formatted that way, but we're working, we're hoping that will be something that will be included with a future update. The other thing here I want to emphasize real quick, and this at the bottom of this slide here, and I highlighted this part, and it's important, so I'm going to just kind of read it out. But basically, it's saying it is important to be aware that the terms MUTCD and Ohio Supplement and MUTCD, National MUTCD and Ohio Supplement to the MUTCD, or the Ohio Supplement to the MUTCD and National MUTCD may be used interchangeably with Ohio Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or OMUTCD. So in a nutshell, the use of the term OMUTCD now means the MUTCD and Ohio Supplement, and any of those terms that you might use to describe the two documents or the one document, it's intended that they're to be used kind of interchangeably. So that is important. Let's see, I'm going to click in here real quick. We'll take a quick look at the actual website itself. Let's see here. I'm going to move this over here. So hopefully everybody can see that on the screen share, but I got the website pulled up. This provides, quick access to the Ohio Supplement document. So there's a couple different places on the right sidebar here. We've got links to both the supplement document and to the National MUTCD document. We also have the same links down here at the bottom as well. So either of those take you to the same place. What else? We have here recently, actually, we've added some of the information related to these trainings with some link backs to some of the recordings to some of the past trainings. So that's a relatively new add as well. We also have a mention here about the revision 1 of the national manual. So just kind of the basic overview of that. And if you want, a deeper dive, there's a link to all of the associated federal rulemaking information. You can go check that out to take a look at all of the specific details. And then otherwise it's, some of the background information for use of the manual and some of the regulatory legal requirements. So that's just kind of a quick overview of the landing page for the Ohio Supplement. So we will jump back over to our slides here. And, next I want to hit on, before we jump into the part 6 content, I want to hit on a couple of review things with part 1 and that are really important. Compliance of traffic control devices. So part 1 is the part that hits on this topic. And what I've put up here on the slide is just a snippet actually from an FAQ website that our FHWA colleagues have put together. And, so there was a lot of questions about compliance dates, and if there were no compliance dates, when do those particular traffic control devices need to meet requirements? And so I highlighted kind of the important or the most important piece of that response, and to kind of paraphrase it, it's basically it's saying that traffic control devices that are not listed in as required for compliance states need to be updated at the end of their service life, or when a new project is happening through that particular corridor. So it's not something, when you get into temporary traffic control versus permanent traffic control, there are some nuances there as well. But the overarching response here is that um, you do not have to immediately rush out and update traffic control devices. However, you need to be starting to plan for that need and getting that programmed into projects and or included with your maintenance activities. And then there's a link here at the bottom of the slide that takes you to that FAQ site where there's a bunch of other good information to check out as well. So this slide, this is the target compliance states for the new manual. So as you can see here, there's just 6 items. None of those items, we won't be taking a deeper dive on any of these today because none of them are within the Part 6 portion of the manual. But I just wanted to make sure that this was out there. Obviously, this is an important component. These have specific time frames for some of these different traffic control devices to be updated. So very important for the various jurisdictions to be aware of these timeframes. Next, I just want to again do a quick review refresher on the definitions of the different headings that are used throughout the whole entire manual. So, and this is not, these headings were in the previous manual. You've got your standard, guidance, option, and support. On the left-hand side here is the new manual with the definition for each of those. What's on the right-hand side of this slide is the previous MUTCD showing the marked up changes between, that were incorporated with the new manual. I mean, there's a couple of things I just want to call your attention to. With standards, they have added the ability to deviate from a standard as long as there is a documented engineering study. That used to not be part of standards, at least initially. Now that language is part of the standard definition. And then with the guidance definition, one, it's a small thing, but it's, there is some, it's impactful. They did away with the but not mandatory language in the previous manual. So essentially what, a guidance statement within the MUTCD needs to have either engineering judgment or engineering study in order to deviate from it. I think, some people, that but not mandatory language, I think was confusing to some folks. So they did some clarifying there. Again, if you need more information on, how to get around the MUTCD and the Ohio Supplement, as well as a lot more background information, check out our training session 1. I believe the sessions are going to be rerun maybe at least once additionally over the summer here. And also there are the YouTube recordings as well. So you can kind of keep tabs on the LTAP website for more information on when those, any of the sessions will be rerun. So I'm going to transition now into talking about the specifics of Part 6. And before we get into that, I want to run this video, and hopefully this will work on work for everybody here, but I'm going to run this video. Is there audio? Oh, yeah. This is the audio's. So did the audio not work for that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Oh, I see lots of thumbs down. I'll share out the video. It's also available on YouTube. Sorry about that. But there's actually a series of 4 videos, and I mean, they were all professionally done, and they're very well done, in my opinion, anyhow. But they do a really good job of humanizing, what our roadside workers are doing, whether you're a highway worker, whether you're a tow truck driver, a first responder. All of those folks, there's short videos that get into all of those different areas. So I mean, I wanted to show this first off before we jump into the deeper dive on part 6, because this topic of temporary traffic control devices, I mean, I feel like a lot of times it's maybe overlooked a little bit, or it's kind of an afterthought. You put a ton of focus on designing your project or figuring out what work needs to be done, but then sometimes the uh, how to you know control the traffic during that construction sometimes is maybe a little bit of an afterthought. And I definitely want to challenge you or encourage you to be thinking about it a little bit different. I mean, it needs to be thought about right along with the initial design of projects, or right along, as you're planning out different maintenance activities, that type of thing. Because, at the end of the day, we want our uh, roadside workers to be getting home at the end of the day, at the end of each work shift. And then, likewise, it's not just the roadside workers, but we want the traveling public that's going through these zones to be able to navigate them, as safely as possible as well. So, so I guess I just again want to challenge you all, and hopefully, if you take away one thing from this session, that want to challenge you to be thinking about that, and how you can uh, you know improve the work zones to make them safer for folks. So with that, I mean, we'll share these videos out. There's a series of 4 of them. We'll send that out. Maybe Jonathan or Emily can do that here through the chat while I'm talking, but we'll keep moving here. All right. Whoop. All right, so moving on, and actually this QR code, actually, if you've got a phone on you, that'll take you to that web page that has all of the different videos available. They're also out on YouTube as well. So definitely encourage you all to be sharing these out to folks. Like I say, they do a good job of making sure that you're thinking about the human aspect of temporary traffic control. Moving on, again, just to kind of reiterate the importance of this topic, I wanted to show some statistics here real quick before we go into the MUTCD content specifically. So this graph here, I just want to explain, this is work zone crashes through the end of March. And want to make it clear that, so these numbers for, all of the previous years are just through March, so that this chart is essentially, it's an apples to apples comparison of all of the different years up through March as far as work zone crashes. And obviously these numbers are higher than they, we certainly want to do what we can to be improving upon these numbers. And there's a couple other slides here we'll get to. So here's our injuries. Again, some similar trends to the total crashes. And these are the same as far as being relative to each month, year to year through the end of March. Here's our serious injuries. Again, same type of relative to each month. So 10 serious injuries already in 2026. So that's obviously an issue that we want to improve upon. And then, here, unfortunately, is our fatalities in our temporary traffic control zones. So again, just want to kind of reemphasize the importance of this topic, and that definitely this is not, this topic is not an afterthought. It's something that needs to be considered throughout the whole development projects, as well as as you're working on maintenance programs, plans for work along the roadside. So before we get into the actual weeds of part 6, just want to make everybody aware. So with the new manual, there, if you were familiar with the previous OMUTCD, there's been a lot of reorganization of content. It's kind of been moved around, grouped together. In general, I feel like it's that, that they've done a good job with that to try to kind of group things together more logically, so you're not having to bounce around to get your questions answered. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. Jumping into part 6 now. So here's how things are organized in part 6. We'll take a little closer look at each of these chapters. But first off, just kind of want to show the general organization. And then this slide just kind of continues that organization of all of the content. Jumping into chapter 6A. So how these slides are set up, if the section number is highlighted pink, there's a slide associated with it. If it's highlighted yellow, that just means it's part of the Ohio Supplement, and it automatically means there's going to be a slide associated with that. So that's, as we kind of go through these next several slides, that's how things are set up. Looking at 6A, there's just a couple things highlighted here, up at the top. Just again, we talked about the low volume roads, and this is just an example of where some content, that used to be part of the previous chapter 5 of the previous MUTCD has now been moved into the different relevant sections. And down at the bottom here, just calling attention to this particular paragraph, how this was changed from standard to a guidance statement, but obviously still important in either case. With section 6A2, so this is the fundamental principles of your different temporary traffic control zones. Most of this content came from 6B01 of the previous manual. And I just would say that this, if you're relatively new to temporary traffic control, this is a great section to review. There's a lot of good reference information here. Continuing on in 6A02, I pulled up, there's 7 principles of temporary traffic control devices, and a couple of them I want to touch base a little further on. So number 2 here, road user movement should be inhibited as little as practical. And I mean, that's important, and it's something that there's a lot more emphasis on. This came from some, there's some additional guidance in a NTSB HAR 15-02. This talks about situations where the demand can exceed capacity, and where that could potentially lead to queuing. And obviously when you get queuing events, that can lead to some safety concerns and that type of thing. So, so some additional emphasis there. And then also, I highlighted this number 6 item, again, just to call attention to how, folks really, in all levels of the organization, that have involvement with temporary traffic control devices. This is talking about the training that should be given to those folks that are involved in any aspect of temporary traffic control. So sometimes I think maybe that's missed, but it is an important thing that folks that are working out alongside the roads are aware of the different tools that they have available to them, as well as the folks that are planning out this type of work as well. Section 6A03, so this one is actually in the Ohio Supplement. The reason that it's in the Ohio Supplement is this paragraph 2, which I've got right here in the middle of the slide. The definition for traffic control devices, our definition in Ohio, we've included flaggers, whereas the national definition did not. The other thing to point out here is our definition, we updated our ORC to essentially mimic the new MUTCD definition, with this exception of adding flaggers. But otherwise, our ORC definition mimics this definition here as well. So 6A04 and 6A05. So 04 talks about crashworthiness of devices. So all the different aspects, components of a temporary traffic control device, the majority of them all have different crashworthy requirements. As far as ODOT projects, we have created, some approved lists of different devices that meet some of the different crashworthiness standards. I mean, we're still working through the transition period, moving over into the MASH crash testing. But for ODOT projects, we have that information out available for folks to use on our projects, and then any others that might want to check that information out as well. As far as night work, there's a couple things to mention here. Just I mean, a lot of people I think automatically think, well, you just do the work at night. It's that's the solution, but you want to make sure that if you're doing the night work, that you do have reduced traffic volumes, and your setups and teardowns of your zones are relatively easy. Otherwise, that can there can be some issues that could arise there, and that's what this is talking about here, as far as just some support information on that topic. And then again, night work, obviously with reduced visibility, does increase some safety issues. So you've got to account for those, and with increased lighting, making sure all the devices are visible, all the workers are visible, that type of thing. So so just don't automatically jump to night work necessarily. You want to be thinking about those impacts. Chapter 6B here, temporary traffic control elements. So we're going to take a look at all of these sections. 6B01 and 6B08 are part of the Ohio Supplement, so we'll take a little closer look here. In 6B01, talking about our temporary traffic control plans. The reason this is in the Ohio Supplement is that we added some info in there about setting up speed limit modifications for our work zones or temporary traffic control zones. So we gave some reference information there. It is down here at the bottom of the slide is the actual Ohio specific content. The other thing I wanted to point out about this particular section is this is another really good reference section for those folks that maybe are just getting started in temporary traffic control plan layout or design. Looking at 6B02 through 6B05, so this kind of breaks down the different components of a temporary traffic control zone. One thing I want to talk about briefly here, so this section 6B05, in fact, talks about mobile operations, and there's obviously some nuance with mobile operations that you need to be aware of, and how obviously becomes much more difficult to provide channelizing devices for moving operations and things like that. So so this has some good information there. But just to talk a little bit more about the different components, so the full temporary traffic control zone, just from the picture here, it's way easier to just illustrate it in the figure here than to explain it verbally, but it's basically the whole entire zone there. Moving into your advanced warning area, so that's your lead in with your signage approaching the work zone. So that's this section here at the bottom of the screen. And then your transition area, so that's where, if you're if there's a lane, if you're having to take a lane for the work zone, that would be your transition area where you're transitioning folks from, say, in this example, two lanes down to one lane through this work zone. And moving on here, the final few components of a temporary traffic control zone. So we've got our activity area, which is the area where the actual work's happening, and this includes the buffer space, which is recommended to be providing to add some additional space ahead of that work zone, just provide some increased safety. And then the termination area, so that's once you get beyond the work activity area, as you're ending, you've got your tapers and your end to the zone there. So that's just all of the different components of a temporary traffic control zone. So in section 6B08, this gets into the different tapers associated, from merging to shifting, shoulder tapers, etc. The thing I want to point out here is this section we did have Ohio specific content. This content it's the same content that we had previously in our in the OMUTC document previously, but so it's remaining again, and the change here is that we are increasing the length of the shifting taper in most instances. We give some criteria there as far as speed as well. Again, with the taper section 6B08, just wanted to show this. there's a figure in there that's also part of the Ohio Supplement that just illustrates kind of graphically what we're talking about as far as the shifting tapers and the modification that we have made Ohio specific. 6B09 just talks about basically the differences between a detour and a diversion. Diversions, I think a lot of people use the term maybe runaround as another term that's used, but that's basically when you're creating temporary pavement just to get around, say, a particular obstacle. I mean, sometimes this is done, maybe a culvert replacement, that type of thing. Even some bridge replacements do that type of a thing. Whereas a detour, you're actually closing a section, the section that's being worked on, and you're using existing other existing highways to reroute that traffic around. So just the nuance between those two definitions. Looking at Chapter 6C here. So this gets into pedestrian and worker safety, which obviously is a big consideration. With the new manual, there's been a increased emphasis on safety of both, the workers as well as pedestrians, bicyclists, etc. So that this section gets into some of that. Sections 6C01. So this there's no real changes from the previous language here, but this again just emphasizes the need for the folks that are setting up these work zones that they have the appropriate training and certification so that they can get these the work zones set up appropriately and as safe as possible. Next two sections here, 6C02 and 03, just get into some of the different considerations as far as pedestrians and then accessibility. And kind of in a nutshell, we need to be thinking about, if your particular work zone has pedestrian users, you need to be thinking about how you can accommodate those pedestrian users and not create, more conflicts for those folks. And then, similarly, as far as accessibility goes, if an existing area has some existing accessibility accommodations, if we have to make adjustments there, work zones need to maintain those accessibility considerations. In 6C04, again, this gets into worker safety considerations, and I lists off several different areas that that anyone that's involved with setting up temporary traffic control kind of needs to be thinking about, as ways that they can make these work zones a bit safer for our workers. And this just continues on, and talks about some of the different elements that can improve worker safety, like shadow vehicles, if it's appropriate, road closures, obviously, the workers are have increased safety during full closures, and then use of law enforcement officers or lighting and other some of the newer devices, which we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things a bit later. Section 6C05. So this gets into the high visibility safety apparel. I mean, there was information in the previous manual that talked about this, but it was kind of split up into multiple areas in Part 6 previously. So this is one of those examples of a lot of that information from the previous manual has been pulled from various locations and kind of compiled into one particular section. So, this just gives the particular specs for your high visibility apparel. And then also this, this other highlight here just talks about how not only, your roadside workers, but your first responders also need to be thinking about this high vis apparel as well. And again, just kind of reiterating this, probably one of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit out there as far as work zone safety is making sure that all the folks that are out there working on the roadside have, this high vis gear. Um, I can't stress this enough. I mean, if folks aren't visible, I mean, that's obviously a big problem. And this is, again, something that's low hanging fruit that I think everyone, can easily start to do if you're not already doing. Um, Moving on here, going to talk some about flagger control. So obviously this is one of the main processes for, when you're talking about 2-lane roadways and you need to take that 2-lane roadway, 2 directions, and take it down to 1 lane. So this gets into flagger control, and I've got some slides here for all of these. We'll just kind of run through those here. So first off, qualifications, again, just talks about, what you need to be thinking about, if you are looking to, get one of your employees, if you're a construction contractor or work for ODOT or a city, what does a flagger need to be able to do? So this kind of gets into some of the things that that you need to be thinking about before just putting somebody out there to do the flagging operations. These other sections here at the bottom, so 6002 through 04, 02, talks about the stop slow paddle, which is our typical way of flagging a work zone, in non-emergency situations. The other two here that they talk about are more intent. The intent is for those to be used primarily just in emergency type situations. These next couple slides here, what I just wanted to kind of pull up and show, this is just a markup of the previous manual showing some of the changes included in the different flagging procedures, just some, addition of mention of specifically uniformed law enforcement officers. Um, this is again just to kind of show some of the changes from the previous MUTCD. And then again, similarly here, again, just kind of showing some of the changes from the previous manual. Obviously stopping sight distance, and sight distance in general is a very important consideration when you're talking about flagging. So it gets, adds a little bit of additional content there related to that. And this slide here, just, again, pictures are way easier to illustrate some things than trying to verbally explain it. But on the left-hand side here, we've got your traditional, I'll call it traditional, they call it, the preferred method for flagging with your stop slow paddle. And on the right hand side, this is more for your emergency type situations when you're just using a flag by itself. So this just kind of, it's a good reference for folks that, maybe don't do this type of thing a lot, but maybe are being asked to go out and help out on a crew doing some flagging on a project. And with that, we have come to our first break here. So we're right at 9. Let's see, I got 9:55. So we'll we'll just take 5 and get started back up here at right around 10 o'clock. So we'll be back here shortly. Okay, we will go ahead and get started back up here. Hopefully everybody had time to stretch their legs and fill up their coffee cups or whatever you needed to do. And we will jump right back into things here. All right, so moving on, getting into chapter 6E. In 6E, this gets into some more details actually with some of the one-lane, two-way traffic control. I didn't prepare any separate slides here, because this talks a lot about a lot more detail on the flagging operation or method. It also talks about a few other methods like pilot cars, where you're basically having a vehicle at the beginning of a group of vehicles, kind of escorting the group through the work zone, that type of thing. And then also, for low volume roads, they do talk about just a stop yield control type, where you're taking two lanes down to one, and but again, that's only in situations where it's low volume and there's good visibility for the approaching vehicles. So moving on into 6F, this gets into some of the temporary traffic control zone signs, and I do want to hit on 6F02 a little bit. And in 6F02, there's some graphics that kind of it's a good reference example for placement of these, some of the different types of temporary traffic control signs, as far as both your horizontal and vertical placement for the signs. So, just kind of want to call attention to that as a good reference resource. And then similarly, in cases where you aren't able to post mount these signs, these are some examples of other ways that you can set up the sign placement, more of in like a temporary type scenario. Moving into chapter 6G, so this gets into the actual regulatory signs for our temporary traffic control zones. We do have 3 sections that are part of the Ohio Supplement. And also I want to hit on 6G02, which talks about just the sign design and size. And really with 6G02, what I wanted to point out is, and this is similar, throughout the whole entire manual, most of the sections that talk about specific signs, they begin, the beginning part of those sections includes a table that provides some reference information as far as, where to go look for more information on those signs, as well as the sizing of those signs. So you can kind of see that here on the right hand part of the screen. I know it's probably pretty small to be able to read, but I just want to make sure you're aware of that. That's a good reference resource. And also just to be aware, these tables, as we were going through our Ohio Supplement, we made the decision not to include any of these tables over into our Ohio Supplement. In the cases where we do have Ohio specific signs, we have added, graphic examples of those in some of the figures, and then we've also provided some references to where you can find more information out on those Ohio specific signs. And, speaking of one of the Ohio specific signs, so in section 6G04, this gets into the road closed signs. And we have added, as part of our Ohio Supplement, we added this sign that's showing up here on the right-hand side of the slide, the road closed for high water. And then we've added some language here about the use of that sign in this section as part of the supplement document. And moving on, again, another regulatory sign that is Ohio specific are these weight limit signs. This is mentioned in 6G06. And then I just kind of want to, for a little bit further emphasis, just make sure that you all are aware that this R12H6 sign, this is a different design than what we had previously for an Ohio specific weight limit sign. So be aware of that. And then also be aware, we looked at, back several slides ago, we looked at compliance requirements. Just for our structures, there are some weight limit sign compliance state requirements. So be aware, as you're taking care of those compliance states, you need to be using these updated Ohio specific signs. Next section here that's also in the Ohio Supplement. This is our Ohio specific signs that gets into the increased fines within work zones and the use of those signs, and some of the regulatory information, the legal information as far as where that is coming from in the ORC, and how to use those signs. So that's there's quite a bit of content Ohio specific in this particular section, and all of it is related to just the usage of this particular sign. So moving on, talking about our warning signs in our temporary traffic control zones. So I want to take a look at 6H01. And then we also do have some Ohio specific content in 6H38. So we'll take a look at that a little closer as well. So 6H1, what I wanted to do here is, again, so the figures at the beginning of pretty much all sections that are focused on sign usage. Again, there's tables and there's figures. So you got, a tabular format, and then you've also got some graphical examples of these signs. So this is what we chose to update when it came to Ohio Supplement. These figures and not the tables. And then we, like I said, we provided some reference information as to where you can find that information. And again, this is just the last few sheets of that same figure. And similar, this is the table that goes along with it. Again, so for reference information, this is a great place to start the figures and these tables as far as the different signs associated and how to use them and where to find more information about them and the sizes. So with in our Ohio Supplement, the only warning signs that are Ohio specific it's actually this sign here that's on the left hand side of the slide, the no edge lines, which we use quite a bit for resurfacing type projects and that type of thing, just as to provide some additional information to motorists for those situations where where the edge lines are not available on a stretch of roadway. And the content, the text content in that section just gets into the usage of that particular sign. The other thing I wanted to point out too, that that has been omitted with this version is this particular sign. We used to use this. It was in our previous MUTCD. It's no longer part of our Ohio supplement. We used to use this in some of your shift type situations. So we no longer are using that. There was some concerns brought up, when we were working through review with our federal colleagues, and we ended up eliminating this particular sign. So I just want to make folks aware of that as well. Looking at Chapter 6I, so this gets into the guide signs. I didn't provide any independent slides here. I just kind of pulled, these are the different sections, and then these are some of the signs associated. So this is just the type of information that you would be able to find in this particular section of the manual. All right. My screen seems to be frozen right at the moment here, so give me a second. Might have to get out of the slides and/or session here. I'm getting the blue wheel of death. Oh, all right. Actually, we skipped forward a couple of them. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. Hopefully we don't have any more of those. All right, so we are now looking at temporary traffic control zone pavement markings. So again, this is another important component. You've got your signage, you got your pavement markings, all these things, working together, making up our work zones. In 6J01, this just gets into the basic information about, pavement markings in your work zones. I added this information in here, and this particular paragraph 4, this is just another example of where the new manual changed some information from a standard requirement to a guidance statement. But again, after looking at the differences between should and shall, I hopefully that makes some sense on why those changes were made. 6J03, so this gets into our temporary raised pavement markings. This is in this example, there has been some changes. Previously, this was done through a formula, figuring out the spacing. In this new manual, they've actually just kind of provided some specific values for different situations. So, that actually makes it a bit simpler to come up with your spacings when you're needing to lay out any of the raised pavement markings for a temporary zone. And then here, just delineators. Again, these are just to add increased emphasis of any of the traffic control devices. And, just want to make sure that, when we're adding additional things to the zone, that they're being added in a crash-worthy type way. So that was just the quick emphasis point here with this slide. Looking at Chapter 6K, so this gets into the different channelizing devices that you can, that are available for use in the different work zones. In section 6K01, we do have some Ohio specific content. It's actually in one of the figures that's within that section. And then I also did want to take a quick look at section 6K07 as well. So in 6K01 here on the right hand side, this figure is what this is the Ohio specific content. And really what we did here is a few different things. There was a few areas in this figure where there was just needed some clarification based upon how the text was set up in the sections, related to tubular markings and cones, etc. So we've made a few updates there. There also was a known error that we incorporated here as well. So we'll need to be going back and checking that known error to see if that was actually incorporated into the revision 1. So that would be something that would be showing up in July if that is the case. This is one I have not specifically checked as of yet. So moving on into the different barricades, I just want to kind of call attention. Number one is whoever came up with the different type naming convention is a genius, because they made it as this is about the simplest naming convention that you could ever come up with. But your type 1s are just one horizontal element, type 2s are 2 elements, and your type 3s are 3 horizontal elements or rails. So kudos to whoever came up with that. Instead of making it alphabetical or some other designation. So another thing I just want to kind of call attention to, and this is really a kind of a nuanced thing, and I think it's something that a lot of people really aren't necessarily aware of, but want to call attention to this, the text here at the bottom, and how the orientation of the striping of the barricades is purposeful. That depending on the orientation, so looking at this text here, when the barricades are entirely across the roadway, the stripes should slope downward in the direction toward which the road user must turn. So these examples up here, so they're all sloping downward to the left. So someone approaching these barricades, that's just another visual cue that when they reach these barricades, they need to be making a left turn. So in instances where you could make a turn in either direction, the downward stripes need to be sloped, starting at the center of that element, both to the left and to the right. So again, I think that's something that a lot of folks aren't necessarily aware of, but there is, it's just one additional thing, and it's like I say, it's additional cue to the drivers as to the intent, as to their next movement once they reach that particular barricade. So chapter 6L, so this gets into some of the other type traffic control, temporary traffic control zone devices. And a couple of these I want to take a little deeper dive in. Want to look at 6L02 and 6L06. 6L02, this is the section on automated flagger assistance devices. We just the acronym of AFADs, AFAD or AFADs. This is not new. This was in the previous manual. However, I just want to kind of call attention that, we do have supplemental specs associated with the use of these devices. And, those are found in our 830 and 930 supplemental specs. But essentially what these devices do, in flagging type operations, they're automated devices that help with that flagging operation. And this next slide just kind of illustrates the setups with the two different types of devices. You've got, on the left side here, you've got a device that's just, will alternate the stop or slow paddle. And then on the right hand side, you've got a red or yellow ball along with a gate. So those are just the two different styles of AFAD devices and kind of the intended usage for those. And again, like I said, we do have some supplemental specs that do cover the use of those devices on ODOT type projects. So with aero boards, one thing I wanted to bring attention to, so see this from time to time kind of driving around, and I totally understand it, but I want to kind of explain a little further. So with aero boards, the intent is that the arrow or the chevron, so talking these I guess top 4 rows of this figure here. So when you're looking at arrows or chevrons, those are only intended to be used when you've got a stationary or moving lane closure on a multi-lane roadway. So where the confusion sometimes comes in, and then see this from time to time, is when you're talking shoulder work, a lot of times, say somebody's occupying the right shoulder. A lot of times you'll see an arrow board that's got the arrow pointing left, and what that's intended to indicate is that there's a lane closure there. So it's given some misinformation to our motorists. And then another component to that is, as more of these devices have additional connectivity built into them, some those devices have the capability to transmit information. So if it's a left arrow, that particular device would be transmitting that information of a left arrow, which would then signify a lane closure. And if the navigation apps and different things like that utilize that information, again, that's going to be misinformation and might cause confusion for motorists. So I just want to kind of call attention that the use on the shoulder is the caution setup for an aero board. And again, I totally understand. Um, you're out there, you're wanting to try to get traffic away, uh, even if you are just occupying the shoulder. But I just want to kind of try to explain the intended use and how that can cause some confusion for the motorists involved. Looking at some of the other design features for and other safety devices, there's a couple sections here that I want to take a little closer look at. So we'll take a look at positive protection and temporary traffic barriers. So this particular section, there's been a lot of work done on the federal side to have increased emphasis on positive protection. And so just kind of wanted to call attention to that. And so this section, covers some of that and some of the instances where, positive protection is definitely a recommended use. Also, want to take a look at 6M05 and talk about the crash cushion. So we're seeing more and more of these. I mean, on say, portable barrier, things like that, or that's where you would see the stationary crash type cushions. And then on a lot of our vehicles now, or trucks, or a trailer mounted attenuators, so so that if we're out there for short term or say moving operations, there are now these crash cushions that can be mounted to the backs of the trucks, or again to a pull behind trailer. So these are some additional safety options, and in a lot of cases are, especially the truck mounted ones for your short-term type operations with higher volumes can be very beneficial. And this picture is just an example. I mean, this is not actually, this is a trailer mounted attenuator that had been struck. The damage here is actually pretty minor. I mean, I've seen some other photographs of these things being completely crunched, and so I mean, there's definitely several use cases where these types of temporary attenuators can be quite useful. And so it's definitely something, even when the manual may say optional, it's something maybe to give some consideration to with how you set up your particular work zone. So this chapter, this has a lot of meat in this particular chapter. We don't have any Ohio specific language in chapter 6N here, but this, again, as far as like a reference type of a chapter to be looking at, this is a great one to use as a reference, just to kind of walk through a lot of the different scenarios, and it does a lot of explaining on how to set these different types examples up. So we're going to take a look at several of these sections in chapter 6N here. The first one here, so this one, obviously this is an extremely important one, and nothing in the different categories of work duration, nothing really has changed here from the previous manual, but I really want to make sure that people are aware of this, because this really plays a huge part in the type of temporary traffic control zone that is needed for the type of work that you're doing. So this kind of breaks out the different time frames. So this is a extremely important variable for you to be thinking about and determine on your particular work zone. And again, I just continued with some of the additional text content here, and highlighted this section about mobile operations. And this is, I don't believe previously this was in the manual. I don't have notes on that, but I'm pretty certain that this particular text was not in the previous manual that talks about, the guidance statement for a shadow vehicle being equipped with an error board or a sign. So, so this is something definitely to pay attention to. I'll have to double check that as far as whether that is a new content, but regardless, it's important content to be aware of, and it is certainly part of this new manual. Next, the next component here, and again, this is another huge one as far as what you need to be doing when you're setting up your work zone. So, this talks about, where the location of the work's actually happening. So, it's got the different locations, and then depending on some of these different locations, this kind of helps to guide you on what the appropriate traffic control devices are needed for that particular location. So again, this section and the previous section we just looked at as far as duration, you always want to be thinking about those two components, and determining that for your particular project or maintenance activity, whatever it might be. So now we're going to jump into some of the specifics for some of the different scenarios and the content associated. And I mean, I'm not going to take a ton of time, you know, looking through all these. I just kind of want to make you aware of several of these, so that it, in the future, if you have a particular project that has this type of work, you have an idea of where you can go to kind of get some more reference information. And in this case, there was no significant changes from the previous manual. And then this section gets into work on the shoulder, but cases where you're not encroaching out into the lanes. So again, I highlighted some things here that I felt were important. The standard language of the paved shoulders having a width of 8 feet or more. If they're closed, at least one advance warning sign needs to be used, and along with channelizing devices. And I'm just paraphrasing there. I mean, you can read the exact statement, and then again, this section here. So you work on the shoulder, no encroachment. Again, just to re-emphasize that, the arrow boards, if you have one for that shoulder work, needs to just be set up in the caution mode. So this one, kind of transitioning into a shoulder where you do potentially have some minor encroachments. This just gives your guidance, and then talks about some numbers as to how much encroachment, and then again, based on your time frame of work and the volumes of that particular roadway, there's some options there. And as I'm assuming you're kind of gathering from just as we've been talking through this, I mean, the setup of temporary traffic control zones, I mean, there's a lot of variables involved, and there's a lot of different options based upon some of the different variables involved. So that's where it gets, there's just a lot of nuance associated with it. So 6 and 08 and 09 talks about work when we're within the median, and then when you're actually working out in the traveled way of a 2-lane. So we've already, like, situations where you got work in the traveled way of a 2-lane. We've already talked some about that, because a lot of times those would be could be flagging operations, or there's also some talk in here about detour scenarios as well. And then transitioning from that the previous section was more of kind of a rural type application. This section gets into more of the urban type applications, and how there are some different considerations, and in particular, definitely need to be making sure you're aware of other users, whether it's bicyclists, pedestrians, or maybe even transit. Those types of folks, you need to be making sure that those uses are also being considered in your temporary traffic control zones. And then work in the traveled way, when you're talking multi-lane. And I, again, just kind of highlighted a few points here. I mean, obviously, these are just some of the standard statements within this section. I kind of debated on highlighting certain things versus not. I mean, because, depending on your circumstance, some of the stuff I did not highlight may be important for your particular circumstance. But again, just trying to kind of call attention to some of the important aspects. There could be other things you also obviously need to be taking a look at in your particular project. And then this section gets into intersections, and again, talking about pedestrian accessibility, making sure that's being considered. I mean, as you kind of see here, the progression here is kind of from your more the simpler work zones to some of your more complicated type work zones. Next section is just talking about temporary traffic control when there's work within a freeway, within the traveled way. There has been some additional guidance information added into this section about your queue lengths and assessing that information as part of your temporary traffic control plan. Again, that's a very important aspect when it comes to queuing, and especially if you got queues, folks backing up in one lane and other lanes moving at significantly higher speeds. So this section does add some additional new content that gets into that queue assessment. So here, 2-lane, two-way traffic on a normally divided highway. So this would be, say you've got a 4-lane, 2 lanes each direction. You're taking one side. You're going to be working on one side completely. You're shifting everybody to the other side. So this section gets into some of those considerations. And again, it's, in that case where you're taking previously separated traffic and bringing those two directions together, this highlighted section just talks about how that type of scenario, you need to have some physical separation between those opposing directions of traffic. These next two sections just talking about your crossovers and your interchange applications. Again, just kind of putting this information out there. I'm not obviously expecting you to read every last bit of this and today, but if you have projects where these are a consideration, you'll have an idea kind of where to go look for some more of the details. Here we're talking about work in vicinity to a rail grade crossing or light rail, could be either one. And the important thing here is making sure that if you do have work zones in close proximity to rail crossings, that you're thinking about the impacts there, and if there is potential for queuing because of the work zone, you want to be taking that into consideration and working with the railroad owners to make sure you're working through those issues so that we're not ending up with vehicles that are stopping, queuing back, and getting into the rail area, because obviously that's a serious safety consideration. This just jumps a lot deeper on work within the nighttime hours. There have been some changes in this section. There was some deletions of some content that was previously in there. But again, just kind of wanted to call attention to this so that, as you're working through your particular work zone project or maintenance activity, you kind of have a good idea of where to go looking for some of this info. And then this last section here, so this is a completely new add to the manual. so this talks about a setup for, what they call a late merge. I mean, I've heard some different terms used. I mean, the idea here is to try to increase capacity, and so that the two lanes are being used, all the way up to the lane closure point. And again, this is some of the signing associated with that. So if you're faced with a capacity issue, I mean, this is a tool in the toolbox. I mean, the road users, that would be something that would need to be monitored if this were being used, to see um, how much compliance you're getting with use of both of the lanes approaching. And with that, we are up to our next break point. So we're doing pretty good time-wise. How about let's see, I got 10:41. I mean, why don't we get back into things, say about, let's just go actually to 11 o'clock. We'll give you guys a little bit more time to stretch your legs, check email, whatnot, and we'll jump back in, starting back up at 11. All right, Matt, I'm going to get going here again. First off, before I get going, I want to apologize because my brain was thinking break until 10:50, but my mouth ended up saying break until 11. So I fully realize I'm between everyone and their lunches. So, wasn't intending to have quite that long of a break, but this last segment here, actually, we still will be able to get through and hopefully get you to lunch ahead of time. So I do want to throw that out there. And yeah, we will get back in here and wrap things up. Um, Before we get into looking at the different typical applications and some example, photographs and just kind of talk through some things, did want to talk briefly about um, temporary traffic control through your incident areas. Um, so this section is covered in Chapter 6 of the MUTCD. I mean, this is obviously extremely important when you're talking about, if crashes that are happening out on the roadways, how you respond to those incidents and, to try to minimize, secondary crashes and things that may be caused by just the response. So this section gets into that. Um, there is one part of this section that is part of the uh, Ohio Supplement, and we will talk about that. It's 6002. And then I also do want to talk a little bit about 6005 that gets into some of the lighting considerations. So we will jump in here. So 6002 is in the Ohio Supplement. It's primarily it's just a cross reference just to call attention to, if there is a incident response for a high water event, it's just calling attention to that Ohio specific sign for use. Um, if there is a road closure, that type of thing as part of an incident response. So really that's the only Ohio specific change there. And then, to talk a little bit about the 6005, what I wanted to talk here about is, while, I totally understand, nighttime incident, you have to have light to be able to respond and, do the things you need to do. But at the same time, a couple of the things I highlighted here, there needs to be some thought, consideration given to, um, you know, only using the lighting that you need and not, you know, having additional lights or so much light that it could potentially be distracting for additional motorists that are approaching that incident area. Because the last thing that we want is to have situations where, there's distraction of drivers and we, would have secondary incidents or secondary crashes just because of, some distractions there. So I just, again, I know this is, you have to strike a balance and you need to have enough light to be able to do the work you need to do as far as first responders and, tow vehicles and all of those types of things. But just something to be thinking about, so that we can hopefully minimize uh, those secondary type crashes, at some of these incident scenes. So next we're going to be transitioning kind of the remainder of today's presentation is going to be talking about um, the typical applications. And these couple of things that I've got highlighted here, I mean, they're important, and I'll just go ahead and read them. They're pretty short little segments, but it just talks about how in many instances an appropriate TTC plan is achieved by combining features from the various typical applications. So, kind of goes without saying. These typical applications show a particular circumstance. Well, maybe your project has two or three circumstances that may have some applicable features of the different typical applications. So the intent is that you need to kind of, you use these to help build your temporary traffic control plan. And then the other thing I wanted to mention here is that um, the procedures that are illustrated are intended to represent the minimum solutions for the situations depicted, with the exception of the notes, which clearly call out whether it's standard guidance, option support, etc. The information in the typical applications can generally be regarded as guidance. So that's important to understand. Um, Obviously the notes, are pretty straightforward, standard guidance, etc. Um, but the typical application, graphics themselves, based on the statement here, those are to be considered as guidance. So we will kind of take a little closer look at some of the different typical applications. We'll hit on all of the ones that are part of the Ohio Supplement. I know this is probably pretty difficult to read, but table 6P1 lists out all of the different typical applications here. So I know I kind of crunched it down to fit on one slide, but we're going to be talking about, all of the yellow highlighted ones are part of the Ohio Supplement. So we'll be taking a look at a slide with all of those. And then we're also going to be looking at a handful of other typical applications just that have some things I wanted to emphasize or mention. So, but before we do that, I want to jump into an example here. And, before I start into some of these examples, so we've pulled some pictures from some different folks. The intent of this is not to be throwing shade at anybody, because I understand that, uh, setting up work zones is not easy. There's a lot of variables, and and there could be circumstances that don't show up in these pictures that we're not aware of. But I just wanted to kind of look at a few example photographs, talk a little bit about them, and then talk about some things that maybe could be done differently, or some things to at least be thinking about in these types of circumstances. So that's kind of the purpose of these different examples. This first one here, so I kind of broke these up by some of the good things that I see, in this photograph. And so in this case, the workers here, they do have some high visibility clothing on. Some of the things that, are concerning is, you got your vehicle facing the oncoming traffic there. Unless it's outside of the view of this photograph, there's no shadow vehicle accompanying that vehicle. Um, Also doesn't look as though there was really much of any signing. Again, that's hard to tell from a photograph, but so that was one thing I noted. And then again, it doesn't look like the vehicle is actually, if it does have its lights on, it's maybe cycling in between. But it's not it doesn't appear that the lights are on from the photograph. Again, not 100% certain just from looking at a photograph. So some suggestions here. So as far as moving operations, there's nothing really in the MUTCD that I'm aware of that explicitly gets into that, but I did add in a couple of ORC references that would give some support to the idea of, you know, uh, the work happening, if it is a moving operation, or if it's not, that the vehicle, ideally is facing, with the travel, the travel direction. Um, so that would be one consideration. Also, providing a shadow vehicle, obviously this kind of looks like a rural area, may not be necessarily required. Um, However, there's a lot of benefits to having that shadow vehicle, and if this is a um, mobile operation, again, hard to know exactly, but that this section here of the MUTCD does talk about provisions for, having a shadow vehicle, as a guidance statement. Also, we talked some about the signing. Um, if there is no signing, providing some of that advanced notice signing would be helpful in this situation. And then also the vehicle lighting, making sure that that is on for this particular vehicle. So now jumping back to take a look at one of the typical applications. This one is not part of the Ohio Supplement, but I wanted to add it out here. And again, primarily just to kind of, this is a pretty straightforward scenario. You got a short duration, or a mobile operation on a shoulder. Um, so, the thing I wanted to call attention to is, how they've got the arrow board set up in caution mode here, since the work is happening on the shoulder and not getting out into the lane to close the lane. So like I say, this is, on occasion do see this where we've got, work happening in the shoulder, and there's a arrow to the left indicating that this right lane would be closed. So just something to point out there. Also here, TA6, this is another example that is not part of the Ohio Supplement. I just added it on here, and wanted to make sure that it's very clear that this is really only intended for low speed type applications. But this gives an opportunity to have a little bit of an encroachment out into the traveled lane, showing some channelizing. But again, the emphasis here is that, if you've got higher volumes, this is probably not going to be, it's not going to be a good option for you. And actually, it even talks about it up here at the top under item 2 here, that, if you've got higher speed, that you need to be, taking a look at a lane closure. So TA8. So this one is part of the Ohio Supplement. This gets into, this kind of details a detour scenario. And the reasoning that this one is in the Ohio Supplement is that we had some Ohio specific language here with the notes, and then we tweaked the graphic a little bit as well with some Ohio specific stuff, basically providing, a few different scenarios as far as placement for the barricades. So, just depending on the context of the road beyond the barrier up to the closure point, as to, providing some guidance on how to place those barricades. So that's why it is part of the Ohio Supplement. TA 10 here, this is not part of the Ohio Supplement, but this is a very important typical application for your two-lane, two-direction, two-lane type roadways where you're needing to do work in one of those lanes. So this gets into your flagging operation, the setup of the signage, the channelizing devices, etc. And then the spacing, it's not showing up directly on this TA, but you can refer back the different spacing for the signs based on the road type and road characteristics is provided as as a separate table. Now we got another example photograph. Hopefully this might be a little bit hard to see, but you got some work happening here. Kind of, I mean, it's in the shoulder, but does encroach out into the appear to encroach out into the traveled way a little bit. So a couple, a few of the good things that I see from this, and again, not trying to throw shade on anybody, but just trying to learn from some of these examples and ways that we might be able to make some of these scenarios a little bit better for both the workers involved as well as the motorists that are trying to make their way through these areas. But a couple of the good things, they are using some channelizing devices. I've got the the tubular grabbers there to kind of separate that zone. And then it's hard to see from this photo, but the next photo will show it a little bit better. It's a zoomed in look, but the workers do have the high visibility clothing on. Some of the concerns here, it's kind of difficult to tell what the intent here was, whether it's just to take it down to one lane or whether the intent here is to maintain two. Not 100% sure. And then just don't see any signing in this photograph. Maybe there is off of the image here. So some suggestions here, and again, this is the same work zone or work location, just a different photograph looking a little closer, zoomed in to the area. Some things to be thinking about. So in this case, they've got a pretty sizable excavation, so that's close to the traveled way there. So some consideration to positive protection would be definitely something to be thinking about here. Another thing is if it's possible to occupy just the shoulder, then the TA3 is a possibility for the setup here. Or if not, you could also go with a flagger type operation where you completely are closing this lane. And then, depending on volumes, again, only for low volume use, there is a TA11 that gets into the low volume use case where you would essentially just be signing, having some signing here, and without a flagging operation, and as long as there's good sight distance and lower volumes, that is a possibility as well. So kind of jumping back to typical application, another one that's in the Ohio Supplement, and this starts one of several typical applications that are in the Ohio Supplement, primarily just because of the changes that we made, the Ohio specific changes for shifting taper. So we went through, there are several TAs that include reference to shifting taper. So we just wanted to make sure that we updated all of these to be consistent with the Ohio specific language related to shifting taper. So this is just one example of several. And in this particular case, you got to work right in the center of a low volume type roadway. So TA17 here, mobile operations on a 2-lane road. This is not a Ohio Supplement item, but it's one I wanted to, just add in here as for illustrative purposes. Mobile operations, we talked a lot about that. I mean, that's kind of the tweener area of for a lot of work zones. But all the same, it's something that occurs pretty regularly, whether crews are out there doing some, pothole patching or other quick type repairs. There are there's several instances where you could get into these mobile operations. So this just kind of displays what that would look like as far as you know a setup for your mobile operation. This one again in the Ohio Supplement, and the primary reason again is because of the shifting taper. The other thing that we did change here was this figure, and there were a couple others I think that were similar. We're showing these error boards as being optional. We struck out that optional, since we are effectively closing a lane here. The error board should be part of that setup. TA 25, this is another one, intersection closures. And again, the primary reason is because of the shifting taper that this is in there in the Ohio Supplement. And then we also did another instance where the optional was listed, that we just struck that out for the actual error board. TA 26, another example, work in the center of an intersection, and this one also has some shifting taper references. So this one, again, another occurrence of just being in the Ohio Supplement because we wanted to be consistent on how we were illustrating these shifting tapers. TA 31, kind of, it's I think you're getting the gist here. It's kind of a bit repetitive, but again, this is one where shifting taper, we wanted to make sure we're consistent there as far as shifting taper. And this one also does have the error board consideration as well, where we struck out the optional. TA 32, so this is a half road closure of a multi-lane. Again, shifting taper is the primary Ohio specific content change here. And in this particular case, that there was no optional error board, so that we didn't have to make any changes there. So here's another example just to take a look at. So here we've got, it looks, I'm not exactly sure what they might be working on some curb here or something. I'm not 100% sure, but a couple of the good things, I see from this example, the workers are wearing some high-vis clothing. It's hard to see, at the zoom on this photograph, but, they do have some high visibility apparel on. And then the other good part of this is, there is some use of delineators actually channelizing devices, so in this case, they've got cones. A few of the not so good things, again, we got a work vehicle that's facing the direction of traffic. Hard to tell from the photograph, but it does not look like there's signing or an arrow board, since we've got a lane closure situation here. An arrow board would be appropriate. And then the other thing here is just, don't know exactly what the spacing is here, but certainly the spacing of this taper, the merging taper is pretty short. So just a little quick calculation, assuming a 45 mile per hour zone and a 12-foot taper, you're looking at 540 feet. So I'm pretty certain they're nowhere near 540 feet with this particular example. So some suggestions would be looking at the signing and providing the signing that can be found on the TA 33, in advance of this lane closure. Also providing an error board, and then I gave the MUTCD reference for where to find that. Correcting the merge taper, so that would be lengthening out that merge taper. Again, that's dependent upon the speed, so that would need to be determined based on the variables, the characteristics of this roadway. And then another potential suggestion is depending on the volume, truck mounted attenuator before the work zone, kind of in this buffer area, so maybe actually it's hard to tell. There's not a whole lot of buffer area here, so maybe lengthening that a little bit could be another consideration. So TA 35, this shows a mobile operation on a multi-lane road. So this one, you've got two shadow vehicles, one in the shoulder, and then one out in the lane, ahead of the actual work vehicle. Both of these, they've got the arrow boards. One thing I noticed with this, and something I might check with our FHWA colleagues, this second shadow vehicle, this is showing the arrow, but since it's occupying just the shoulder, wondering if actually this should more just be a caution instead of the arrow indication. That's something I'll have to, like I say, maybe talk with our colleagues at FHWA about, just to make sure that we're understanding that, correctly. That's something I want to check into a bit further, and I just happened to notice it, so I figured I'd bring it up. But again, this is a mobile operation, so making sure that when you have these types of setups, these typical applications are handy references to be able to get your basic work zone set up. Again, these are supposed to kind of be the minimum requirements. There can certainly be some additional things added depending on the specifics of your particular work zone. Moving on, another TA in our Ohio Supplement is this lane shift on a freeway, typical application. Again, the reasoning is solely in this case because of the shifting taper. And also just note here, this particular slide, I didn't, this has actually more notes than that I did a screenshot of. It goes, there's 3 or 4 more items below. I just didn't show those just for space considerations, but there are some additional notes that go along with that. TA 38, another one in our Ohio Supplement. This one is another instance of a shifting taper where we wanted to note that. And that's really the only Ohio specific change on this particular typical application. This one is a median crossover typical application. Again, got shifting taper updates, to show the Ohio specific information there. This is another one where I didn't have the space to get all of the notes on this particular slide. So this one here, this one actually is not on in the Ohio Supplement because of the shifting taper considerations. This one we added an additional optional sign here at the the point where you're diverging from the main roadway, just basically indicating, you know, the exit ramp is open. That was something that we previously had in the previous OMUTCD, and we just carried it forward to this similar typical application. TA 45, it's in the Ohio Supplement. Again, it's a shifting taper issue. Here I just took a full page because there are a lot of notes associated with this one. This is your reversible lanes using movable barriers. Not something that that is done a ton, but it's definitely a tool in the toolbox, and especially if you've got significant differences between AM, PM, peak type volumes. This is something definitely to be considered when you've got those kind of situations. But again, really the only Ohio specific change here was the shifting taper. So another example here to look at. So here we have a crew. We've got a truck that's I'm not exactly sure if they're working something with the signal, and then we have a flagger out here in the intersection. So a couple of the good things see from this example, so they're wearing the high-vis clothing, and they're using the traditional stop slow paddle for the flagging operation. The bad in this instance is no signing, and from talking with the person that provided this photograph, yeah, they had verified there wasn't really any signing, approaching on any of the four approaches to this intersection. There's no cones here, other channelizing devices. In this case, the gentleman here is flagging, so he's stopping traffic while the traffic signal up above here is got the green ball. So there's contradictory information there that could be confusing for motorists. And then, for this type of work, obviously this is a difficult scenario where, we don't know the circumstances. Maybe this was something was very short term, but if this is if closures could be appropriate there depending on the situation. So it's just, again, looking at some things that you see out there in the field, and hopefully these are kind of spurring some thought on, hey, yeah, we had similar situations. Maybe there's a few things we could do here differently to improve that situation for both the workers and for the traveling public. So some suggestions. So there is a typical application, and it's TA 27. I'm not going to pull it up here, but it does get into some, suggested traffic controls for your for an intersection type scenario, where that might be applicable for this particular situation. Again, like we talked about before, maybe maybe full closures would be a consideration depending on volume and time needed. That would definitely make things safer for the workforce that's out there, up in the bucket truck. And whether full closure could be for a longer term period, or a shorter term, just dependent. Again, those are some of the variables you kind of need to understand, going into some of these situations. And then another thing I'd suggest here, since we're talking about a signal location, doing a little bit of coordination in advance with the signal owner would go a long way here. If you can work with them to put that signal in flash, that way you're not having contradictory information with the flagging operation. These next few slides here, we're going to look at these real quick, and I really just wanted to pull them in here just to call attention to how the new manual has added 3 new typical applications that are intended for use at roundabouts or circular intersections. So this is something, obviously there's a lot more of these types of intersections being built, kind of all around the state, all around the country, actually. So this is the first time that the MUTCD has provided any typical applications to try to address, how you set up work zones in some of these types of intersections. So this is the first scenario, just a short-term, short duration type setup. This one gets into, the flagging of a single lane circular intersection, so this would be for a longer term scenario. And then this third one gets into, what would be needed if you got a multi-lane roundabout and you need to close that interior or inside lane. So again, these are all 3 of these are new typical applications, intended for, for some of these roundabout scenarios. And again, these are some of the minimum, these are minimum recommendations, based on your specific locations, there might be some additional traffic control needed. And then to close out here, we got one more example. So this is an example. I think they're doing some resurfacing here, some repairs. And some of the good parts here with this photograph, so there is signage here. Also, if you kind of look up in the foreground or the distance here in this photograph, you can see, this vehicle has some lighting, so that is definitely a positive, to call attention to the work vehicle there. Some of the not so good things, the sign spacing here, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm pretty certain it's not, there needs to be a little bit of spacing so that the motorists have time to react to the situation at hand. So the sign spacing is a bit of concern, and then there are no channelizing devices. In this case, looks like, they got a flagging operation happening here. So that's another not so good thing that, noted at this location. Some suggestions here, setting up the signage and the channelizing devices per that flagging typical application would be a great improvement here. Like say, increase that spacing so the motorists have more time to appropriately respond. And it would give that, channelizing that work zone just to provide that bit of extra separation there. So with that, we're going to kind of wrap things up here. I did want to add this slide here. This is just some resources for, our Ohio Supplement, the National MUTCD page, where you can go to get the standard highway signs information. So this is the national sign detail information. Then we also have a link here for Ohio SDMM. So this is the manual or the document where you'd go to find Ohio specific sign details. We also have a lot of the federal signs here as well. But definitely for the Ohio specific signs, this is where you would go. And then also just a link to our previous MUTCD. And then on that page, there is actually links to all of the prior ones prior to 2012, or at least several iterations prior of the OMUTCD, if there were any needs to access those for, for historical purposes or archive purposes. That information is out there. And with that, we will wrap things up and kind of open it up if there are any questions that are still hanging out there that we need to talk about. Matt, I'll turn it back over to you at this point. And
All right.
thank you everybody for your attention. I know that's a lot to get through, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It looks like we are up to current on all of our questions. I've responded to everyone who's messaged in the question chat panel. So I appreciate you addressing those, especially Jonathan and Emily helping out with those as well. So on behalf of the Ohio LTAP Center and ODOT, I want to thank all of you for your time and for the vital work you do to keep our roadways safe. Before we sign off, just a few final reminders. If you were present for the full duration of today's webinar, your certificate will be emailed to you within 5 business days. These hours count towards the Road Scholar Training Recognition Program. As we conclude, a brief 4-question survey will pop up in your browser. We truly value your feedback, so please take a moment to let us know your thoughts. We look forward to seeing you for session 5 on May 14th, where we will cover parts 7 and 9, including school areas and bike facilities. Please ensure you have registered for that specific session to receive your link to join. Thank you again for joining us. Have a fantastic rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.